Don't say anything good about it until we're live, until we're on the air.
Well, we're live. So, greetings, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's Naomi Wolf with Outspoken. And I'm here with one of my favorite people, and certainly one of my most admired public intellectuals in America these days. And that's Mr. Eric Metaxas. Welcome, Eric.
I I don't know if it's registering on camera, but I'm blushing. Uh, Seriously, that's so kind of you, so gracious. Thank you, Naomi, because I think the world of you. I really am thrilled that you read the book and liked the book. I mean, I never expect that, so that's like a super bonus. Thank you.
Well, you're you're way ahead of me. I just want to tell people what we're here to discuss. Eric has written an extraordinary book about the revolution. And who is he? You should know if you don't already. He's the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Bonhoeffer, as well as 5 other New York Times bestsellers. Good Lord, including Martin Luther, If You Can Keep It, 7 Men and Miracles. His acclaimed Letter to the American Church was turned into a documentary film, and his book, Is Atheism Dead?, will soon be a streaming TV series. He's written over 30 children's books, including the perennial bestsellers Squanto and The Miracle of Thanksgiving and the lullaby It's Time to Sleep, My Love. His work has been translated into over 25 languages and has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Wall Street Journal, the New Republic, USA Today, and many other publications. His writing has inspired a full-length documentary based on Letter to the American Church. And he is the founder and host of Socrates in the City, as well as the Eric Metaxas Show. Known for his wide-ranging conversations, he's interviewed such Hollywood icons as Ron Howard, Mel Gibson, Morgan Freeman, and Dick Cavett, to tech entrepreneurs such as Peter Thiel. This year, Metaxas was appointed to serve on President Trump's Commission on Religious Liberty, and he was appointed as a Distinguished President's Fellow at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Wow. And he's currently at work. Well, this should be updated because it's out, at work on a major book about the American Revolution. And that book was just published, and it's called Revolution. It will change your mind forever about the nature of the American Revolution. So go ahead and I hate to do this, but start with that perennial question: what led you to this subject?
I got to pay the rent. Just kidding. What led me to this subject? Well, honestly, I have to say, Naomi, that it's real. I never ever thought I would write a book or write about the American Revolution. It was never on my dance card, so to speak. But that's happened with many of my books, that it's just not something that ever occurred to me. And then somebody mentions it or something like that. And, I've put my cards on the table. I ask God to lead me in everything that I do. As you know, at a certain point in life, particularly, you think, I don't want to waste a minute. But about 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago, not long ago, a very, very dear friend of mine, whom I revere and respect, said he'd read my chapter, a chapter in my book, Seven Men and the Secret of Their Greatness. And the first chapter is about George Washington. He said he was so moved by it. He said, Eric, you should write the whole story of the revolution.
Wow.
And he doesn't speak lightly. And so I thought, wow, I've never thought of that. Obviously, at that point, I began to think about it. And then, you do your market research, so to speak. You think, do we need another book on the American Revolution? There have been zillions of books on the American Revolution. But I feel like part of God's calling on my life is, to be a popularizer, to write. In other words, not to come up with anything new. That's what academics do. They've got to find some new angle or something like that. It really was to really answer the question, I realized we've come to a time in history where most Americans are ignorant, as I have been, of our history. We've sort of forgot about it. Maybe we heard about it in 5th grade or 8th grade, but we've moved into this brave new world where America is bad and we don't want to celebrate America. Whatever. It's just the general zeitgeist of, we don't do patriotism. It's kind of funny because you and I we're in the same class at Yale, and I remember I encountered this view the first time because I come from a working class, um, background. My parents are immigrants from East Germany and Greece to America. So my parents always taught me to hate communism and to, realize that living in America is a privilege or whatever. So I never encountered this jaundiced view of America or patriotism until I came to Yale. Of course, I get there, naive, innocent, and I get the memo. Like, we don't do patriotism. Patriotism is for suckers in flyover country. America bad, the West bad. But I was naive enough to just accept this, or at least to accept it mostly. And so we've all lived in that world where the cultural elites sneer at
Mm.
patriotism,
Mhm.
and they don't say that they're ignorant enough to say nationalism is bad, as though
Mhm.
it's Hitler's nationalism as
Right.
opposed to George Washington's nationalism or
Mhm.
Abraham Lincoln's nationalism. So I really thought for the 250th anniversary of America, it would make sense to
Mhm.
write a book that simply tells the story. Now, this is not a
Mm.
patriotic book per se, it's just the story, the telling
Right.
of what happened 250 years ago. How did America come into being 250 years ago? That was my assignment. And I really did feel like, it's an important cultural service to tell the story well, to
Yes.
tell it entertainingly, to put in all the stuff that you need to put in, and to leave out the boring stuff, just to tell the story so that somebody can read it and say, okay, now I get it. I understand what happened.
Right.
But in the course of doing that, as you would know if you've read the book, things kind of come out that I hadn't seen in the course of doing the research. And so the answer to why I wrote it is really because I felt we needed a one volume telling of how America
Mm.
came into being. I had no angle on it. I just wanted to tell the story and felt that there are so many books again on the American Revolution, but they all do a slice. I mean, even David McCullough's 1776 or some of these huge bestsellers, they just give you a slice.
Mhm.
And I thought, I want to tell the whole story if
Wow.
possible, between two covers. So that's really why I wrote it. And of course, in the course of writing it, as I've just mentioned, things came out and I saw things.
Mm.
But the answer to why I wrote it is simply I felt we needed a telling of the story. And just to put a button on it, I felt that we have been guilty as a country and as a
Mm.
culture of not knowing our
Mm.
story. That, like,
Right.
it's actually hugely important that we know the story. And so I thought, let me write a book that helps us to know what we must know.
Right. Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer. And I have to say, I too am guilty of not really wanting to revisit or have deep knowledge of our country's founding because honestly, a lot of the books that are out there are so boring or so patchy, right? Or they go deeply into a biography, but they don't give the big picture view. And that's why I can't recommend Eric Metaxas's Revolution enough because it really is, well, it is a page turner, but more than that, I think as a public service, I think you're right to think of it that way. It it really does give it kind of a proportionate big picture of how this led to that. Things I barely understood, the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre, the Tea Party. I thought I kind of knew those events in history, but I had no idea, and you make that history really come alive and you show the interconnectedness of those events and those personalities. I don't know anyone else who's achieved that.
Well, again, encomia coming from you are, all the more wonderful, because I do think that I didn't think in the course of writing it, you begin to despair sometimes, because I wrote it at this fever pace where
Mm.
I thought, oh my gosh, I need to get this out by, the summer of 2026.
Mm.
And that wasn't enough time. So I really was in this crazed season of just, reading and writing and reading and writing, and just blocking out everything else, to the point of when I went to the gym, I'm listening to the American Revolution podcast. I just had to immerse myself. But I think that's happened with most of my books. I get kind of in a situation like that, and then in some ways, good comes out of it
Mhm.
because it does immerse me so deeply that I'm, like doing brain surgery. You can't be disturbed.
Mhm.
You're focused. There's something good about that. And I do feel, in the end, I'm pleased with what I ended up with, which is
Mhm.
a surprise because I really did honestly think in the middle of it, like, I'm just doing, this yeoman's work. It'll be sufficient, but it's not what
Right.
I'd hoped. And
Right.
in many ways, it is what I'd hoped. I mean, of course, in many ways, it's not because I felt like I wanted to be, 1,000 pages and not a slim,
Mm.
girlish 600 pages. But I think because it reads fairly well or quickly, or you said it's a page turner. A lot of people have been saying that. And of course, as a writer, as an author, that's hugely gratifying because I
Yeah.
want my books to be difficult to put down.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I was just thinking like you may have been immersed in the subject with your other books, but I don't think you've ever had a deadline as hard and fast as our nation's 250th birthday.
That can't be moved.
Right? They
I don't
can't
care
be
how much
moved.
money you have in the world. You can't move that kind of thing. Like, yeah,
Right.
July 4th, 2026. Sorry, can't do anything to push that back a couple of months.
No,
So,
indeed,
yeah.
but you made it. And how has the reception been? Has even kind of the New York Times and legacy media covered it and give it
No,
its
of
due?
course not. Oh, goodness, no, 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 no. The legacy media doesn't exist. I mean, this is we're living in a new world.
Right.
The New York Times, no one almost has reviewed it. I mean, part of the reason for that, to give them benefit of the doubt, is that it came out very late. It was rushed out. It was printed, quickly. Usually, books they want all this lead time, and
Right.
but that's like 19th century publishing standards. It's
Right.
preposterous in this day and age. But no, I mean, I will say this: it has been dramatically well received everywhere it's been received. It has been on the New York Times list 8 weeks now, and it was number
Bury the
two.
lead. That's amazing. That's
Yes,
amazing,
yeah,
Eric.
eight
Ah,
8 weeks. It opened at number two, and it's never gone below 9. Last week it was 8, but it was at number 2 twice. It was at number 3. I mean, way up there. So it's selling well.
wow.
But the thing is, uh, what amazes me, I mean, it won't amaze you. You know the world we live in. But the first week the book came out, it opens at number 2 on the New York Times list. What's number 1? Jill Biden's book. Now, I have to tell you, there's two pieces to that, right? First of all, we know that when it comes to a book like that, they have pack money, whatever, they're buying
Sure.
vast amounts, they're pumping it, pushing it
Right.
as hard as the New York Times was pushing it like crazy. I don't know why. I guess that they would push a book, praising Stalin, but the point is that besides that, I know from the hard numbers, from the book scan numbers, the official
Mm,
publishing numbers,
mhm.
that my book in that season, in that week, outsold Jill Biden's book
Wow.
by 25%, a huge margin, not just a little
Wow.
bit. And they still put her book as number one.
What?
And so that's
That's
the world the world we live in.
so
But
corrupt.
having read the book, you realize that my book is not some like MAGA book, or it's not some book about Jesus and the American Revolution. It's just a flat telling of the American Revolution. But if you tell the story of the American Revolution straight, which is
Mhm.
exactly what I intended to do, just to tell us this is the straight
Right.
history of the American Revolution,
Right.
the faith stuff is inescapable, much more inescapable than I thought going into it. I thought
Right.
everywhere I look, I see the Christian influence, the faith influence, but it's just everywhere. And I thought not to talk about it is in effect to lie by omission. And you realize that a lot of what's been written on the American Revolution has done that.
Interesting.
And I think it's kind of like the world we live in. You know this, and I know this, that the secular elites, they're uncomfortable with the faith stuff. So they will ignore it by default just because they don't speak that language.
Mhm.
But sometimes, of course, they will deliberately bury it because it doesn't suit their narrative. And so,
Right.
simply by telling the story straight, which is all I really wanted to do,
Mhm.
it ends up being a lot about the faith at the heart of the birth of America. But again, it's not like that was my intention. But to tell it straight, you just think, my goodness, this is everywhere. and that is amazing. The so it has not been received in mainstream circles almost at all. But
I'm sorry to hear that, but it sounds like we're in a world in which you don't even need, you know, that review coverage and legacy media to get into many, many hands. So
well, think about it. Think about it. That none of my books has ever. I just got yesterday, the Yale Alumni magazine, right? And in case anybody doesn't catch it, I don't think well of our alma mater,
right.
but they have never mentioned any of my books. I've had a number of
Wow,
New York Times bestsellers,
wow,
but
wow,
Bonhoeffer sold 1 million copies, translated into
wow,
19 languages. They
wow.
never mentioned it. So we're living in the world where they're going out of their way not to promote people they think of as, I don't know, neo-fascists or whatever they heck they think we are, if we say things
Right.
that dissent from the standards that they've set.
Well, let's go deeper into that really interesting riff you just gave us about how the Christianity, the faith was everywhere. I mean, one reflection line, it's so illuminating to listen to you because I'm kind of mentally going back over everything I've ever read about the American Revolution and knowing that that world was steeped in faith, right? That there was no, it wasn't just religion, it was philosophy, it was cosmology, it was ideology, it was, geometry. It was like their understanding of the world was through what we call Christianity, right? And I'm realizing that you're right, that a lot of what I've read, certainly most of what I was taught, stripped that away. So you have a section called The Christian Roots of American Liberty. Can you go deeper into that? What are the Christian roots of American liberty? Deeper than just saying like they were a bunch of Christians.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing, is like the most shallow level is to say they were a bunch of Christians. Even that people will debate, and you think that's not debatable.
Right.
That alone
Yeah.
is not debatable.
No.
The least Christian were Christian by today's standards. I mean, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were dramatically Christian compared to the secular standards we have today. So to start with, they were all Christians, most of them very serious Bible believing, today we would say evangelical Christians. This was at the heart of their identity.
Right.
So you start there, right?
Right.
But a lot of people say, okay, so the founding and the birth of America is consonant with Christian faith. Okay, whatever. And then I realized, no, the whole thing came out of their faith. It was an explicitly, consciously Christian project. They realized we have an
Mm.
opportunity to create a nation based on the ideas of the Bible. What does that mean? It means we don't need an earthly king.
Right.
We're going to go back to the Sinai covenant. We're going to come out from under Pharaoh. We're going to come out of Egypt and bondage, and we're going to be alone in the wilderness looking to God as our king. That's what they were doing. They were explicit about it and conscious of it. And even if you don't agree with that, even if you're an atheist, you have to acknowledge that's what they were
Right.
doing. That's what they said they were doing. You have to give them that this is what they thought that they were doing. And of course, that's only what happens in 1776. What leads up to that, George Whitefield, the great evangelist, I mean, probably the greatest of Christian evangelists in the history of the world, who I always joke around, he makes Billy Graham and the Apostle Paul look like lazy agnostics. Uh, George Whitefield, all through the 18th century, he's preaching through the 13 colonies, and there's this tremendous revival. We call it the Great Awakening.
Mhm.
And I mean, I remember in my like 8th grade, uh, junior high school textbook on American Revolution, there was like a couple of paragraphs on the Great
Right.
Awakening. Like this was a central piece that sets up what follows, this idea that we can govern ourselves and that we're all equal under God and whatever. These are all biblical ideas. And so I don't know. I don't often use the word chortle. I never use the word chortle, but I chortle and guffaw at the idea that you could just sort of have America, leap into being
Right.
from what?
Right.
These are biblical ideas. The idea
Yeah.
that we're equal. Where do you get the idea that we're equal? How
Mm.
are we ever equal? How
Mhm.
have we ever seen ourselves as equal? Nobody in the history of the world has ever seen all people being equal apart from the Bible, where God declares it because he created us in his image. Otherwise, we see examples of inequality all through history. It's just kind of like how human beings behave. So that idea, the central idea
Mhm.
that we're equal, we're created equal, is a very radical idea. You don't get it from
Mhm.
French atheist philosophy.
Yeah,
You don't get it from Voltaire.
right.
Where does it come from? So the roots of all of these things are biblical. And when I say biblical, I mean filtered through Puritan theology, mostly in New England,
Mhm.
which is all the result of the Reformation.
So that
I
was my
wrote a,
next question.
yeah,
You have a section, I believe, related to John Adams on the
yeah,
role of the Reformation.
yeah.
Please talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this, I'm always very happy to say that I didn't know this before. I don't want to be one of these people that pretends like I knew all this and I put it in a book. I didn't know any of this before. I just knew enough that I wanted to write a book. And then in my research, these things pop up and I'm astonished.
Mm,
How come I haven't heard of this before? And
right.
this happens with almost every book I write. I find something, and I think it's because of my you know, maybe my Christian background or my I see stuff that I can see why other people might have ignored it because it would be
Mm,
sort of puzzling and they
mhm,
would just kind of move on.
mhm.
But when I read this essay that John Adams wrote in 1765,
Wow.
I was in awe. I thought this 30-year-old super genius writes an essay laying out everything and then some that we're going to encounter in the years ahead. Um, and, Jefferson's like a teenager at this point. Like all these ideas are in an essay
Mhm,
that John Adams writes, and he basically he he really talks about how the fundamental ideas of the Reformation
mhm,
um, were what I mean, and most of us we should know this from our grade school, that why did all of these people come over from Europe to brave 3,000 miles in these
mhm,
boats,
mhm,
risking their lives to because the most central thing in their lives was their Christian faith,
mhm,
and they were being persecuted. James the First in England was persecuting them, and they really were being persecuted horribly, and they
mhm.
said we've got to get out of here. So of course
Right.
the folks that we call the Pilgrims first go to Holland, but then they say, we don't want our kids being Dutch. We're gonna go across, and they settle. But how many came over? Obviously, in 1630, John Winthrop and the Arbella and the whole Massachusetts Bay Colony, they come over so they can be Christians according to the Bible and not according to um, the established churches, right? So for
Right.
them, the Church of England is effectively like the Catholic Church. It's
Mhm.
hierarchical. It's
Okay.
kind of like, shut up. We're going to tell you how to interpret the Bible. You're not going to interpret it for yourself. Um, the people of the Reformation, these dissenters, whatever, many of them came over to America. So they established these colonies, I should say, these communities,
Mhm,
in what comes to be the 13 colonies, but they're very separate. They're like 13 different uh, countries,
mhm.
So you have 13
Wow.
different countries, they each doing their own thing, and they
Mhm,
each have their own particular form of Christian descent, So you get, here there are Quakers, and here there are Congregationalists, and here they're doing their own thing,
mhm,
but they're governing themselves because they're far enough away from England that
mm,
they're like, well, we're going to govern ourselves. So they have already done what would happen in 1776, which is to say, like, we've come out from under this world system, which is this is
right.
what John Adams talks about in this essay, right? That this hierarchical system. The title of his essay, it's one of the first chapters of my book, but I write about the essay. But the title of the essay is a dissertation on the canon and feudal law. And so he's just talking about what life was like in Europe,
Mhm,
that the established church, this authority, and the state, this authority, it was kind of feudalism, and they get out from under that
mm,
to govern themselves, and there's this egalitarianism to it, and they are like Israel in the Sinai wilderness. They've come
mm,
out from Pharaoh and Egypt, and they are able to look directly to God, and by doing that they could actually govern themselves, and they actually did govern themselves. And so this goes on and on and on, and then suddenly, after the British win the French and Indian War,
mhm,
and they say, well, okay, we're going to have to tax the American colonies. That's when the American colonies say, well, wait a minute. We've
Mhm.
been doing our own thing. We're not represented in Parliament. By
Right.
what right do you tax us?
Right.
And that's where these ideas, coming from the Reformation through the Puritans, whatever that, we're under God first,
Right.
and we're under any king or anybody second.
Mhm.
And so if there's any daylight between these two, we choose to serve God rather than man. Well, that sets up a conflict because King George III and his parliament didn't quite see it that way at that point. They weren't exactly Pharaoh, but they were acting in a pharaonic, if I pronounced it correctly, way, to some extent. So that's what sets up the clash. But it's a fundamental clash between a view that says we are free under God
Mhm.
and we look to God and we
Mhm.
can govern ourselves, and a view that says, no, you're not. You're under the king and shut up and pay your taxes. And so that's what sets up this conflict. But it all comes out of this Reformation Puritan theology. And that's why we have to be really clear. I don't say this enough. Massachusetts and New England Puritans, they led the way in this. I mean, we never would have had a revolution,
Mhm.
if not for Samuel Adams
Mhm.
and John Adams and James Otis and all the others, that they really were leading the way, that they were these, the descendants of Puritans, but they still had this Puritan theology. They're thinking along these lines.
Mhm.
And the British had no clue what they were facing. They just thought,
Right.
well, these are people sort of like us and they'll do as they're told. It's like, no, no, no. For 150 years, they've been doing what
Right.
they think is right before God. So
Right.
that's
Wow.
that's the long answer to your question. My apologies.
No, not at all. I mean, you've distilled really an essence of the American spirit, and so many thoughts are going through my head. But one of them is, as you probably know, because I'm sure I've talked about it, I'm reading the Hebrew Bible and comparing it to the 1560 Geneva Bible, and then comparing that to a modern translation. And the reason I bring this up is the 1560 Geneva Bible is the Bible that these gentlemen were reading. Um, and it is a Bible that is, largely lost to us, with the establishment of the King James Bible. The reason I bring this up is when you read it, because it's a very pure translation directly from the Hebrew by Protestant Reformation dissidents who fled for their lives, fled England to do this in Geneva, right, where they would be safe. You really see directly how America got born, because the actual literal translation really leads to these conclusions that you're describing. You can govern yourself. Free will is the greatest gift. Your king is God, no one else, and everyone's equal. All of these ideas. Um, those get watered down in subsequent translations. So I just think it's fascinating that you're, going back to that essence. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is I think a lot of people who have read modern translations don't realize how radical the Old Testament is in saying these things that actually led to the formation of America. The other thing that comes to my mind is that rebelliousness, or like, don't, we have another person to serve than you, Germany, or you, Belgium, or you, wherever we happen to be. The Israelites and the Protestant founders of the United States share that quality, and it's because they're reading the same book. And the last thing I was going to say is, the New Testament has unbelievable riches, of course, but it doesn't really have a blueprint for governance. It's, render unto
No.
Caesar that which is Caesar's, but
Yeah.
Hebrew Bible and the translation that these gentlemen were reading has detailed blueprints for how to govern yourself in the wilderness. So that is a riveting riff you just gave, and it meshes and dovetails with so many things that make sense to me, now that I'm putting these texts all together. So thank you. I think you've distilled something absolutely fundamental about America. You've also, I must say, distilled something fundamental about why we can't just open our borders and expect America to survive.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, this is what a lot follows from this, right? And I
Right,
think, I
so
mean,
much.
I want to say again that the the I always hesitate to say the founders because these are really before the founders. These are the revolutionaries. Okay, this is
Right.
way before Madison and the Constitution, whatever. These are the people in the 1760s and 1770s trying to figure out what do we do as Britain is kind of pushing us, because Britain suddenly discovers its power and becomes this big empire, and it's like, okay, now we got to behave like an empire, and so they start pushing, the 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies, well, we haven't been pushed around for decades and decades and decades, and
Right.
we're not going to let you do it now, so we have to respond. And what happens, and it's just so fascinating the way history works, right? Because of this, the 13 colonies do something that they never dreamt of doing. They unite, they
Ah,
talk together,
wow.
and they discover something that they didn't expect to discover. They discover that, first of all, they're all Christians and they're all coming from a Christian point of view, but they're all different denominations. So they're very worried about this because they take their Christian faith so seriously that they take their denominations extremely seriously. They want to get everything right. But they discover this thing that once they're forced into the same room, that if they really squeeze the Bible a little harder, the one thing that pops out for everybody is liberty.
Mm,
That is at the heart of the
mm,
scripture. And they
yes.
had never seen it quite so clearly before.
Right.
I mean, Luther certainly didn't get it. The 1620 Pilgrims and the 1630 Massachusetts Bay Colony, they didn't get this. They had these things that are really like theocracies.
Mhm.
So suddenly you have, in 1774, when they get together in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia for the first Continental Congress, they're like, they didn't have a clue what they were doing there. They're just going to get together. They don't know who's going to show up. And they realize at the heart of the Bible, in other words, if you put a gun to somebody's head and say, what's in it? What's at the heart of it? Don't give me blah, blah, blah. What's at the most important thing? Liberty. This idea that we are naked before God, we're equal before God, and no one can force me to believe in the God of the Bible, and God himself will not force me to believe
Right.
in him. That's at the heart of it, is
Yeah.
that God wants us to know him and love him and serve him, but he won't force us. And that's at the heart. It's the magic of it, right? That it's based on love, not coercion.
Right.
They discover this in 1774 inadvertently, in a way. I mean, somebody, I always forget who, it's in the book, but says that, shouldn't we have a prayer? And they're like, no, 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 we can't pray because it's so divisive. Who's
Mm,
going to pray? Is it going to be, the Congregationalist or the
mm,
Quaker or the Church of England? From better not.
mhm.
And then, in a way, the most religious of them all, Samuel Adams, says, I would, in effect, be delighted to hear a prayer from any man of faith. I'm not going to
Mm,
cavil
mm,
at,
yeah.
and so he says it's fine with me. Who prays a Church of England? The most
Wow.
opposite in terms of
Yeah.
hierarchy and a view of the church or whatever. And it is the most glorious extemporaneous prayer. They're all in awe of this extemporaneous prayer by this Church
Wow.
of England minister. Quakers are weeping because Quakers have been persecuted by the Church of England. So something happens in that room
Right.
that's never happened before. And
Right.
I think they all discovered, you know what? There's this American Christian faith. It's a
Mm,
creed beneath all this other stuff. We can disagree on the details,
mhm,
but at the heart of it all is something central, and
mhm,
we all agree on that,
mhm,
and that launches them going forward. It's so amazing to me that we discover this idea of religious liberty. I mean, it's not like there was none of it. There was a little bit that was happening in
right.
Rhode Island and whatever, but they all kind of discover this, that at the heart of everything is this idea of liberty and religious liberty and whatever, and it just launches them into a new world, and suddenly it occurs to them it might be possible for us to base a nation on this, not
Mm,
just a colony, but that we would unite and base a nation on these ideas. I mean, I certainly hadn't seen that until I did the research for the book, but it's
right.
it's it's staggering, and you have people like Thomas Paine, you know, saying that this is a new epoch in the history of the world. That, that
Mhm,
that the birth of America. This is not just another nation; it's another kind of nation,
right.
hitherto unexistent, non-existent.
Right. Well, I mean, Luther and the Protestant dissidents in Europe couldn't have imagined a context of a great open wilderness separated
Right.
from kings by a mighty ocean that would allow for this kind of tabula rasa let's start over and do it the way God wants, right? I
Correct.
I just have to note, not divisively, but just to kind of all of us deepen our common roots, that the text that you're citing, that from which they drew all of these first principles about governance, is a Jewish text that became
Oh,
the.
wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm the first one that wants to assert that. This is, look, I'm the first one that
Are
wants to
you
say,
Jew-splaining to me?
what? Am
Are
I
you
juice planning?
are
Yeah,
you
no.
Jew-splaining
No,
to
no.
me?
I juice plane wherever I go because I am a Jew grafted in by faith. That's what my New Testament says, that I've been grafted in to the religion of Jesus, which is the religion of the Jews. It's not, he didn't invent a new religion, right?
Right.
And so this idea is so central. And John Adams says that there's no people other than the Hebrews that have done more to advance civilization. And again, they're going back to the Sinai Covenant. And in every single speech now that I give on this book, I say that in case you wanted to know what they thought they were doing, the least religious, Franklin and Jefferson, when they were asked to come up with a seal, an image
Mhm.
to explain what is this new nation,
Right.
Benjamin Franklin comes up with the image of Moses. I believe he was Jewish. Uh, he comes up with the image of Moses overseeing the parting of the Red Sea and
Wow.
Pharaoh's army drowning.
Wow.
Jefferson comes up with the image of the Israelites in the Sinai wilderness following the pillar of fire and the
Wow.
cloud, following
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
That is what the new nation meant to everyone involved in its creation. And it is inescapably Jewish. That's what it is. It's a reprisal of the Sinai covenant.
Yeah,
And
I
so when
wasn't being
people
yeah,
miss that, they're
territorial.
missing everything.
Yeah,
What's
no,
that?
absolutely. I mean, I wasn't being territorial. I bring that up just because I think that a lot of people on the right these days who are not deeply read in these texts, as you are, simplistically call for a Christian America without
Yeah.
understanding that you're saying something more profound than that, right? You're talking about common roots that go all the way back to the covenant in Sinai, and that's more than, older than, a simplistic Christian America. And I think,
Well,
right,
the ignorance on this is it's almost not worth talking about because it's too painful.
it's painful.
When somebody says Christian, I just want to say Christian is Judeo-Christian. It
Right,
becomes
right.
preposterous. Okay,
Uh,
the Old Testament,
gives me a headache.
there's nothing. You know, I just don't know. Jesus said he came to fulfill
Right.
the law, not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. That these things are hand in glove. They're part of the same thing. I mean, it again. It is only in case because we need to move on here. But you know who tried to take the Jewish out of the Christian faith? Hitler and the Nazis. And
Of
I wrote a
course.
whole book about it called Bonhoeffer. And so, if you want background on what idiots have tried this before, that's who tried it before. And it is a mug's game. It is a fool's errand to
Thank
try
you.
to
Well,
do it.
Well, thank you. So let's move on to a couple last things. Can you talk about the Townsend Acts, which also are, shrouded in the mists of things I forgot in high school, and the Boston Massacre as
Yeah.
critical points?
Well, I always, nobody's asked me to talk about the Townsend Acts. It's kind of funny, or Townshend Acts. I think it's Townshend Acts, but I mean, it's kind of funny because as you know, since you've read the book, I can never resist when I find something entertaining, like I've got to put it in the book. And Charles Townsend, known as Champagne Charlie, is like one of these ridiculously entertaining figures, and I have to write about him and what Horace Walpole says about him. It's just so it's very entertaining at the same time that it's very indicative of the decadent British elite culture of the
Mm,
time, which stands in very sharp contrast with the sober-minded
mm,
Christian culture of the 13 colonies. That the
mm,
British were godless, were cynical, were corrupt, and Champagne Charlie is one of the examples. There are a few, of course, in the book,
mm,
but in any case, when the bottom line is that the Stamp Act fails dramatically
mhm.
because the pushback from the Americans is strong. They say, "Hey, we don't think we should pay this, and therefore we won't pay it. And we have to think about it this way because again, cynical people say, "Oh, they don't want to pay taxes. They don't like to pay money." And it's like, no, no, no. These are men of principle who
Right.
say, "We will not be bribed. We
Mm,
will not be threatened. We would rather die than behave as slaves. We
mm,
will pay what we think God wants us to pay, and not
mm,
a penny more." And we will obey God rather than man, and we will render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but we will not render unto Caesar any penny that is God's. And so they basically they refuse, and in the end they win because they boycott British goods, and they do all kinds of things, as you know because you've read the book. But so they win, and so the British, and this is where you really see what's at the heart of everything. The British very cynically, rather than listen to wise men like William Pitt
mm,
and Edmund Burke, and there's a number of others who say, "Hey, the Americans are correct in this." Instead of that, they go, "Well, okay, we won't push it, but we reserve the right to kind of circle back and tax
mm,
them tomorrow or next week or whatever." They will not concede the point. And there's real cynicism in that,
mm,
as I see it, that they're thinking, yeah, well, they'll bow when we can finagle a way to get them to bow and to do what they're told. And so that's when the Townshend Act is, 2 years after the Stamp Act. Charles Townshend says, okay, here's some other taxes that we can impose, and it's a funny thing because he's clever in the way that he does it, and initially there's a little confusion on do we pay this or is this legitimate? It's a little confused, but the pushback against it, and it's just again funny how this works because it's sort of similar in my Luther book that the Vatican really stupidly keeps poking Luther. If they had just
right.
conceded in the beginning, there would have been no schism. There would have been no
Wow.
Reformation. It's the same thing with England. They really were foolish. Instead of saying, you know what? They have some points here. They're
Mm,
just like, shut up and pay the money. Oh, you don't want to pay the money today? All right, we'll get you in a year and we'll circle back. And they do that with the Townshend Acts. And the Americans, because of the Stamp Act, their sensibilities have been awakened to, or
mm,
their sensitivities have been awakened to these issues.
right.
And so now their pencil has been sharpened. They're looking more carefully at what are you asking us to do? And
Mm,
it smells like tyranny. It
right.
doesn't, maybe it's not full blown tyranny, but it smells like it.
Mm,
You're asking us to do some things. You're asking us to compromise. This doesn't seem right. We're not going to go along with this. And so the Townshend Acts really result in the British, again, very foolishly sending troops to Boston. If you want to really put a stick in the hornet's nest, you really want to do that. That's what they do. And so
right.
they ratchet up the tension, which of course ends in 1770 with what's known as the Boston Massacre. So, and it's funny, Naomi, because the Boston Massacre, I know, or I believe I should say, that my telling of the story of the Boston Massacre is the most complete telling of it that I've ever found. I couldn't find anything that really told the story uh, entirely in the way that I do, because I thought this is an important piece. And so I went out of my way to find all the information to tell that story correctly. But again, it's just this somebody Zobel, who's an historian in 1970, wrote a book, and he calls it this arpeggio of conflict. That it
Mm,
just there's a conflict, and then they kind of back off, and then there's another conflict, and this keeps happening. Obviously,
mm,
1770, the Boston Massacre, 1773, the Boston Tea Party. You keep
mm,
seeing this happening, and then
right.
obviously in 1775 you get Lexington and Concord.
Right. Wow. Well, now we know how we got here, thanks to Eric Metaxas. What would you say was the most important event in the many kind of highlights in the book? What would you say is the turning point?
That's Well, that's very difficult. There are many there are many figures too. I mean, part of the reason I wrote the book, as I said, there are people whose names should be on the lips of every single American. Every single one of us should know who these men were who sacrificed, in some cases, everything. Dr. Joseph Warren, little known, Henry Knox, Nathan Hale. I mean, it really
Mm,
stunned me that Ken Burns' PBS documentary, which I counsel people to miss it if you can. Um, that gave 10 seconds a glancing mention of Nathan Hale, one of the great heroes in American history. And in fact, I'll tell you, the story of Nathan Hale, it moves me to tears. It's one of the most noble young men. You
Mhm.
almost feel like it must be hagiography, and it's not, because there
Mhm.
have been people like this in history. Um, and you know, and I know that outside Connecticut Hall at Yale University, our alma mater, there's a statue that was put up to Nathan Hale from
Mhm.
I guess it was 1914. It was right at the beginning of the World War One,
Mhm.
and that was his dorm.
Wow.
He entered Yale as a 14-year-old. That was the in those days you would do things like that. But he was this brilliant, devout patriot, and so there's this statue outside of Connecticut Hall, and I was flabbergasted and sickened. I guess 11 years ago, I saw that the class of 75 thought it would be
No.
fun to create a bobblehead doll based on that statue. And I thought, this is a man whose hands are bound, his feet are bound, he's about to step into eternity to meet his maker. And the Yale class of 75 thought it would be cute
So gross.
and campy to make a bobblehead doll of that. And I remember I was writing my book in 2016 following this, was the because they did it for their 40th reunion, I guess. So, but they do this, and I write about this in my book, If You Can Keep It, which is a
Mhm.
very short book. And then I wrote a letter to the editor of the Yale alumni magazine, which I can't bear to read, but I said I have to mention this. But that tells you how far we have fallen. That you could have these elite people. I mean, the 40th anniversary of their class, and
Awesome.
they're basically mocking
Yeah.
something sacred. I mean, it's what's more sacred than a 21-year-old being hanged to say
For
my
liberty.
only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country. I mean, I
Wow.
want to cry even saying it.
Oh, it's
And
heartbreaking.
so I feel like that's where we are,
Mhm.
is that the cultural elites in America
Mhm.
are very, very, very similar to the cultural elites in England at the time of the conflict, that they've drifted over
Right.
to effectively be monarchists whose views are extremely similar to the views of King George III and the worst members in Parliament at the time. That's
Wow.
kind of where we are today. So I keep saying we're in the third existential crisis of our history. That's what we're dealing with right now. Is that the cultural elites, they're secular, and they sneer at the biblical faith of a lot of Americans, just as the British elites sneered at the biblical faith of the Yankees. They thought they're just a bunch of ignorant religious hypocrites, and we'll teach them pretty quickly. And of course, they didn't.
Well, one of the great cases of FAFO in human history.
That, you
And
know what? Yes, yes,
and maybe,
exactly.
maybe we're coming to a similar point now. Well, I can't think of a better time. There's never been a better time in my lifetime to have a book like yours, Revolution. And it is the history of the, uh, help me with the subtitle. I don't have it in
Oh,
front of me.
it's the birth of the greatest nation in the history of the world.
There you go. It's
And
a
I
great
don't,
subtitle.
that doesn't mean that we Americans are better than anybody in the world, but our nation is the greatest nation in the history of the world. I feel privileged. I am privileged to live here, and we have a duty to the whole world, and certainly to history, to know this history. It is absolutely
Absolutely.
vital. Most of us have forgotten it. Now is the time. This is the 250th year, and the hour is late. So
Yeah.
I joke around. I say this is mandatory beach reading, folks. Get a copy, and I think you'll enjoy reading it. It's not a ponderous tome, by God's grace. It seems to read well.
It's unmissable. I mean, it's going to be one of those books that every single thoughtful person should have on his or her bookshelf, and an amazing gift if you're a parent or a grandparent. I think this, like, I'm going to rush and get multiple copies for the young loved ones who've been taught that, American history is nothing but slavery and genocide. This is a beautiful antidote to that. Such an essential work. We're so grateful to you. Where do you want people to buy it? from Amazon to keep
Well,
buying?
it's funny you bring this up because I was mentioning it's been 8 weeks on the New York Times list, near the top of the list. Barnes and Noble still does not carry it in the front of their stores. All the other bestsellers are in piles right when you walk in. All the New York Times bestsellers. This book is virtually impossible to find, which tells you something. So I counsel people go to Amazon. Please get it at Amazon. And I really hope you want to. I my hope is that if it would stay on the New York Times list long enough, eventually even Barnes and Noble would put it in the front of the store. I hope that that's the case. So if you're going to buy a copy, please buy one soon, because I do think that the people that don't like this version of things is working overtime to suppress it,
Right,
which is
for sure.
what they do, and they've done it to you
Yes.
dramatically. And so this is so. Listen, we're in an ideological and spiritual war, but God wants us to rejoice, to keep fighting, to keep praying, to keep doing what is right, and trust Him with the results. And that's what we'll do.
Great reminder, beautiful call to action. Everyone, don't delay. Today, you need to order this book, multiple copies. Thank you, Eric Metaxas. As always, you're such a great American and great thought leader. I'm going to say goodbye to you so I can thank our sponsor, but can't wait to
Okay.
have you back. And wow, everyone, what a time to be alive, right? It's pitched ideological battle, and we do need to go back to our first principles. Really important also to have independence at home. And what I mean is this: journalists are reporting on energy lockdowns starting to take place in the EU and Australia, with the official narrative being that this is because of the Iran war and reduced oil supplies. In addition, the FBI is investigating reports of potential sleeper cells in the US. This has just escalated with the rise of the jihadi candidates, even alleged plots targeting major cities and public events. Many Americans are raising serious concerns. Could this situation escalate and begin to disrupt everyday life, including access to basic medications? We've already seen how fragile supply chains can be during COVID. Oil is the backbone of everything we use and consume daily. When conflict hits, 80% of the medications America sources from overseas can become scarce very quickly. That's why being prepped with a medical emergency kit really matters. The Wellness Company offers a doctor-prescribed kit with 8 core medications every American should have on hand, including antibiotics, ivermectin, and more, delivered directly to your door. It's designed to help treat common conditions such as UTIs, pneumonia, strep throat, and 25 other conditions. Are you concerned about expirations? If you Google this military study, you'll learn something new about the scam of expiration dates, PMC 7040264. You can't buy this at a pharmacy. Purchase your kit digitally. Just fill out a medical questionnaire. A licensed doctor reviews it and fills the prescriptions. While headlines can be confusing during times of international conflict, you can be sure that emergencies arise with everyday situations. So head over to dailyclouthealth.com, dailyclouthealth.com, and use code dailyclout to save up to $30 off and get free shipping. Kits are available to US residents only. And thank you all, and I will see you very soon. I'm going to be on War Room in 20 minutes. And then I'll be talking to Jeffrey Tucker. There's so much happening today and yesterday because of the revelation by Senator Johnson and Rand Paul that Dr. Fauci had emailed Dr. Walensky to acknowledge that the COVID vaccines can damage pregnancies, cause miscarriages. This is work, as I know you know, the War Room Daily Club, Pfizer Documents research volunteers, and Amy Kelly and I have been doing since 2022. Thanklessly, exhaustingly, we published 2 books and 109 reports, and we broke that story. And it was because I was reporting on damage to women's reproductive health that the White House leaned on Twitter and Facebook and other platforms to deplatform me and turn my life upside down. So it's a painful, bittersweet couple of days. painful to be proven right after being attacked so hard, but also frustrating because I want the volunteers who put their lives on the line, reputationally, professionally, to do that work. And it was so laborious to get the recognition that they deserve. And other people are unfortunately not crediting them with the work that they're citing as if it's their own. So do the right thing, everybody. And huge kudos to the War Room, Daily Clout, Pfizer Documents research volunteers, and Amy Kelly, who led the charge for over 4 years, all the way back to 2022, because we warned pregnant women considering pregnancy in May of 2022, how dangerous these could be. And kudos to Steve Bannon, with whom I'm about to speak in a little less than half an hour, because he was the only person to give me a platform after I was deplatformed to issue these warnings. So exhausting, but I guess I have to give it to God. Frustrating, I have to give it to God. But the important thing is that we save all the babies we can going forward. Painful, painful revelations. Thank you, everyone. And remember to support Daily Clout. Subscribe or donate. And over on Substack, please do subscribe to Outspoken. We need your help to keep this information flowing. Thank you.